now we have a talk from our host who has managed all this. So I think it's nice that he doesn't has to introduce himself. So this is Yair Grimberger from Israel, having a really interesting talk about looking into what happens when VGI is threatened and taking a look at the recent events in OpenStreetMap when there was a big range of vandalism happening and looking into how the OpenStreetMap community reacted. And I'm really curious to hear what you're showing to us. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Benny. Thanks, and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so this is a work by myself. I'm from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel, and Marco Menini. She's also a co-organizer of the track, and he's from the JRC, the Joint Research Council in Italy, AU Institute. So maybe it's important to say that these are his own views and not the JRC views. Yeah, so I came here to tell you a story today, and hopefully to convince you that we can learn something about OSM generally from that story. And the story, as Benny already pointed out, starts with vandalism and ends with rate limiting, or the introduction of rate limiting to OpenStreetMap. And as a good storyteller, I'll just start by setting the stage for the story. And I'll start with a compliment to all of you here at home, future people watching the recording, because if you're interested in what I'm saying, or what people have been saying these last 3 days, it means that you believe that a crowd of strangers can come together with no direct means for interaction or compensation and agree on a cause, agree on procedures for achieving it, and manage to produce something meaningful. So you're quite optimistic, good news. But OpenStreetMap gives us good reasons to be optimistic, right? It works well. But not all the time everything is unicorns and rainbows in the realm of OpenStreetMap. And sometimes we see this kind of discussions and maybe even arguments on maybe how to map spatial entities like sidewalks. Are they their own entities? Are they part of the road? Or whether some things are really things to be mapped. So I'm taking here from the famous example Monica Stephens used in her paper of the tag childcare, and people having this kind of sarcastic comments on oh, so 10-year-old children go to kindergartens after elementary school in France when someone is voting against this tag. And sometimes we have discussions and argument about specific entities like the Jerusalem node, which is another kind of famous case where there was a dispute around it after a grassroots Palestinian organization claimed it was placed in the wrong place and not the right language for the name of the city. And then for a few years we didn't have a node for Jerusalem in the database. But all these arguments, all these discussions, they're fine. Why they're fine? Because they all come from the same place of agreeing on the objective and agreeing about the procedures. They all come from this place of wanting to represent the physical world in a true manner, in an accurate manner. So even if those discussions escalate into edit wars, where people start doing and undoing each other's work, it still comes from the same place, and no one is challenging the very basic assumptions on which OSM relies. So that, and I took that off of an old blog post from Pascal Nice. So that's on the bad editing behavior maybe, but it's still within the project in a sense. When people start doing edits that contradict the objectives and procedures of the project, we're moving towards the abuse side. And that's where we see vandalism, where people start just destroying the map, basically. And vandalism is not something new. It's been around for quite a while. So the wiki pages define vandalism as intentionally ignoring consensus norms of the OpenStreetMap community about editing data. I would disagree with this definition on a number of counts, but mostly about editing data, because I think ignoring what the project is, that's where vandalism lies, and trying to do something else. And an analysis of user bans from Quinn and Bull from 2019 shows that there were quite a lot of bans related to vandalism or deleting other people's works and stuff like that. And even today, well, a thread that started on the community forum at last June, this June, was about, do you spot vandalism after another major wave of vandalism? And how does the academic research of OpenStreetMap relates to vandalism? Two general approach, and here we see Pascal Nice again, but also other people trying to identify vandalism. That's one thing. And also other people like Levente Juaces and others. This was actually presented on the 2019 version of the track. The case of Pokemon Go vandalism. So trying to understand how it affects the data, how quickly does the community respond. But notice that these two look at it from a very specific kind of data-oriented perspective, like what happens to the data. No one talks about what does it mean for OpenStreetMap to have vandalism? What does it mean to the project at a more basic level? And if we look at how the project reacts or handles vandalism, so this is from the vandalism wiki page. So it says, if you're a normal user, you can revert, undo those changes. There's a normal revert, speedy revert, doesn't really matter, okay? And also, if you're a member of the data working group, the DWG, which is part of the OSM Foundation, and the group that has like the privilege to do things like ban users, you can issue blocks and bans and so on. So these reactions, well, are reactive, are post factum. After we had vandalism, what do we do? How do we react to that? But lately we had this kind of change. We had the rate limiting idea introduced, meaning that you cannot contribute as much as you want anymore. The number of edits you can do per day is limited according to various factors, like how many of them and what your seniority and so on. And if we look at when this wiki page was created, we can see it was created less than a year ago, on November 3rd. And this marks a very drastic change from specific and reactive policies to general and proactive policies. So it's a perspective change, it's a paradigmatic change in how the project relates to OpenStreetMap. And I'm asking, how did it come to be? What led to that? What facilitated that? And I'm claiming that the answer would help us understand ideas of resilience and vulnerability in OpenStreetMap. And here's my story. So the story starts on the 20th of October 2023, when two users or members of the OSM Israel Telegram group, the Telegram group for the Israeli community, reported receiving offensive comments on the recent edits from one specific user. And as the discussion went on, people realized that it was not he or she. It was not only commenting, it was always also editing the map and making clear vandalism acts. That user was reported to the DWG and was banned or blocked. The night after, they realized that he was not alone. There were multiple users making a lot of edits and mainly deleting stuff off the map. And this is a tweet from Ido Klein, a member of the community, noticed from 1st of October, 9 p.m. And I'll translate, this is not a malfunction. This is OSM from now. Someone is trying to delete Israel. And user after user started deleting the data from the map, being reported, being blocked, another user appears. And that even caught the attention of media, also print, but also digital, and saying like on the 22nd, there was an attempt to wipe off Tel Aviv off the map, and it was quickly stopped by the community of Israeli editors. That's wrong on two accounts. It wasn't only the Israeli editors, and it didn't stop. Because if you look only at deletions, and this is the number of entities in OSM in Israel over time from October until the end of November, we can see that, yeah, around the time we have a significant drop in the number of entities, basically 7% of the data in Israel was deleted, but it was quickly reverted, okay? We quickly got it back. But if we look at the number of contributions by type of contribution, we see, yeah, we had this massive deletion, but we also had a lot of tag changes, we had a lot of geometry changes, we had even some creations, but there was a spike, everything. So something else was going on here. And if we look at this example from the northern part of central northern part of Tel Aviv, I can tell you that Tel Aviv is not built in these diagonal lines. There was a lot of geometric changes. And this line actually is the coast. And I can assure you that Tel Aviv is not under the sea in some parts. And the people or person that were doing that, and those were obviously automatic edits, they didn't consider their spatial topologies, because they were editing all entities that are within Israel and not all entities that are fully contained within Israel. So once you edit the coast, you start editing all coasts in the area. So we could see distortions to the data all across the eastern basin of the Mediterranean, from Egypt through Gaza Strip, Israel, Lebanon. This is Beirut area, and you can see like the coastline. You can see also the border, Turkey, Crete, Cyprus. All of them had impacts on the data. So if I'll put everything that happened on a timeline. So actually, the first vandal act happened quite earlier, on the 13th of October, but that was like this one odd event. The full attack started on the 19th of October and continued until 28th of October. And the users that were part of this attack had a few things in common. First of all, they were all created on the same day that they started deleting and distorting stuff. Second, they all had like the same structure for their username. So 7 letters, every second letter is a vowel, like dawakiv, okay? And then 3 or 4 digits. So it sounds like a name, but it's not. And most importantly, their change set comments were, there is no country Israel and free Palestine, or some variation of that. So a bit of like larger context, on 7th of October, Hamas, the organization ruling the Gaza Strip, launched an attack against Israel, killing more than 1,000 people, taking hostages, civilian and soldiers, and starting the current Israel-Gaza war. Not the first one, but the current. And at that time, Israel didn't invade the Gaza Strip like now, but was starting to launch airstrikes against Hamas. So this was a clear, politically motivated wave of vandalism. But this, like, as part of the attacks, other things happened. And on the 22nd of October, in the OpenStreetMap community forum that relates to Israel, a new thread was opened by a member of the DWG saying, okay, these are the users that I identified so far, and let me know if you see more. In the next comment, one of the Israeli members, or the Israeli mappers, invited him into the Telegram group. So we had like suddenly these two direct channels of communication between the DWG and the Israeli community. And they started working together. Israelis were reporting on new users, and the DWG was blocking them. Oh, 5 minutes already. Also, when they realized that that reverting data is not easy, so Israelis started reporting where do they see needs for reverting the data, and the DWG was doing that, was actually handling the revert with one specific user, Israeli mapper, acting like on both areas. And the reverts actually continued until the 8th of December. So data in Israel, which is probably still not 100% correct, was distorted for almost a month and a half. But when those two channels of communication were launched, a new chain of events, another chain of events started. So if I call this one the local and data-oriented one, this is the global and project-oriented one. And on those channels of communication, they were mainly discussing reverts and best and bends, but the DWG member also suddenly mentioned a GitHub issue, okay? GitHub issue about rate limiting, which exists quite for a long time. It exists, I think I mixed the date here. I think it's the 8th of June. No, I'm actually fine. But it exists for 4 years already. So the idea was there. And after he mentioned it, suddenly Israeli mappers started commenting in that ticket. And if we look at the number of comments over time, since 2019, so we see that it started off nicely, but then no more conversation, a bit more in September 2010, but in October suddenly interest really blew up. And it was basically based on those two Israeli mappers commenting there. And it continued until the issue was closed on November. And well, it wasn't the only place where the idea was discussed, but as you can see, a thread that opened on July didn't seem to be going towards convergence. So if I look at the other timeline, so we can see that 6 days after they started commenting, a pull request was created by a maintainer and developer of the OSM repository. 2 weeks later or so, the pull request was merged and the issue was closed. So for 4 years, nothing, suddenly we have rate limiting. And more than that, in June, we got another form of rate limiting. So suddenly we have an appetite for that, okay? So this is the story. But what does it tell us about OpenStreetMap? I think if we look about it, at it from the perspective of governance systems, we may get some insights. And the general way people talk about OpenStreetMap or governance system, there's the ethos of bureaucracy. You do more, you affect more on the project, and hence you have more power. And usually we talk about it positively. Yeah? It's more inclusive. You have the ability to decide how much you will be dominant in the project. But it's also the source of vulnerability, okay? Because it means that every user has the power to ruin and destroy the project. And the rate limiting acts as a buffer from such user, not allowing them to hold so much power. But if we think about on the circle as the extent of power someone could have, rate limiting actually makes this circle smaller. So it limits the power of the single user. And so who limits the power? If you're talking about bureaucracy, who limits the power? And if we think about the process that led to rate limiting, it wasn't about people doing stuff. It's not that someone wrote the code and submitted it as a pull request and it was merged, right? It was about convincing certain people to do certain stuff. So it shows us that there's another governance system, and that's from Fast and Renner from 2014, talking about different layers of VGI projects. And participants are contributing to the data, but the project level is where decisions are being made, okay? And being part of the project of the participants is not based on how much you did, it's based on what power do you have, what privilege do you have. And if we'll take that and use it to think about what we saw about this the second timeline, the second chain of events, so at first we had DWG and the Israeli community on different layers, right? Participants, project. But then, through the process of doing, through the process of taking part in reporting, in managing reverts, we had this kind of temporary coalition, which actually broke this, allowed to this division between the project and the participants to be broken, okay? And since it was oriented towards the data, towards taking care of the data, naturally, it was based on bureaucratic practices. But once it was established, this temporary coalition, it was possible to reorient it toward the project. But when we're working in the project sphere, bureaucratic practices are not enough or don't do anything. You need like more of a political persuasion. You need to mobilize people. So this temporary coalition was used to mobilize support for rate limiting. And finally, the coalition broke apart, not because they didn't agree on stuff, but because the need was gone. And if you notice, the participant sphere became a little bit smaller, because now the project has more power over participants. So what does that tell us about resilience? I guess I'm over time, yeah, but I'll quickly try to end up. So what does that tell us about resilience and vulnerability? I think it shows us that we have those two governance systems, and they relate to an inherent tension within OpenStreetMap, because we want to be open, and bureaucracy allows us to be open, but it also makes the project vulnerable. So to limit vulnerability, we adopt an hierarchical controlling kind of procedure. But since we have those two governance systems, we can use them to play around, okay, to get things moving in one system, and thereby taking care of the shortcomings of the other systems. So that's a source of resilience, of flexibility. Okay, we can get participants to be involved in the project just by getting them to do more stuff. So that's the source of resilience. But we need to be careful about it, because the final result was more power to the project on the expense of participants. So I'm not saying something normative here. I'm not saying whether it's good or bad. I'm just saying that's what happened. And when we do that, we need to be cautious. So, because the easiest thing is to give more power to the project. But do we want to do that? And inductively, we can say this process allows for resilience. But is it a must? Does the project has other path for resilience? That remains an open question. Is it just an enabling or a required factor? And it's not clear. And it's not clear, for example, why the vandalism wave that relates to the Ukrainian-Russian war did not lead to such processes. So those are like avenues for further research. And yeah, with that, I'm done. Yeah, thanks. So while my phone reconnects to Venuless, questions? Okay, overwhelmed. Yeah.
Maybe I also followed quite intense, like how this worked out in the end. What would be your recommendation? Like, how should have this been done differently?
Well, again, I'm not trying to say something normative, because I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. I'm not saying that the limitation of power was necessarily a bad thing, because what we see, vandalism is only increasing in OpenStreetMap, I think. And we saw there was that wave earlier this year. this global one. So maybe we do need some limitations. I'm just saying, and there was a long discussion about rate limiting, so it didn't come from anywhere. But eventually there was one person who decided to implement the code. And I know there are processes within the DWG, within the maintainers and developers sphere of the project to make sure that it won't be that centralized, okay? So I think that's a key thing. So the decision to actually implement it would be carried by a few people and not just by one person that was momentarily persuaded. Again, not saying good or bad, but saying what I observed, yeah? Yeah, Martin.
I think one conclusion I take from this talk is that the close collaboration between the DWG and the local community was very fruitful, at least to alleviate the struggles in the short run. Do you have any concrete ideas to improve this communication for other cases?
Well, whether do I have ideas to, concrete ideas for improving this communication between the DWG and local communities, or generally the project and the participant sphere? Well, there's, I think, right now the Meet the OSMF session, so that's probably a good idea, and it's happening for not the first time, so it's a good idea. I think for many users, like novice or intermediate users that are not here, that are not heavily engaged also in communication, navigating the world of OpenStreetMap, and even for me, when looking at that and trying to understand the difference between maintainer and developer, and thanks Martin for all the tips and helps in clarifying, it was hard to understand who's everyone and what are they doing. I think, and like, luckily, in the Israeli community, there was someone who knows the DWG, who knows how they're operating, so it was easy for them to access, okay? But maybe, I don't know, maybe in Ukraine, in Russia, or wherever, they're not that aware of the option. So I think maybe, it's not a concrete idea, but I think thinking of a way to simplify people navigating OpenStreetMap as a project, as a community, would surely help establishing those relations. Yeah, and let's see if there's something on valueless. Isn't OSM more of a mixture of bureaucracy and meritocracy than a pure democracy? Well, I think what we see here, that it's certainly not just a bureaucracy, and I think that was my point. We have two governance systems: the hierarchical, the bureaucratic one. They coexist. They don't necessarily contradict, and the very fact that they coexist allows for flexibility that is important for resilience. I think that's the main point I kind of want to make in my presentation. So I think I thank the person that asked that for the chance to really emphasize that. Okay, we're running out of time anyway. So thank you very much, and we'll move on to the last talk of the day. Yeah.